So today's 20-minute musing is going to be about death and sort of meditating on death a little bit. If you're new here, hi, I'm Amanda Jane. This channel is an experiment of giving myself a time limit to talk about topics that I have a tendency to talk a lot about. Anyway, so I have been meditating on death and sort of engage with it for a very long time. And the practice itself of death meditation is not new. I know in early Buddhist tradition, it was a practice. And if you Google it, you can find many. So, and maybe how you happened upon my video is you were looking up death meditations. And I think it's something. This is not this is not a death meditation necessarily. This is sort of more of an analytical, introspective, exospective, it's exploration. Because I think death and talking about death and talking about what it feels like to die, or what it might feel like to die, or just all of the conversations around what it means to die or to be dead is something that we often shy away from, especially in American culture anyway. There's this it's something that whenever it's really trend, like the immortality, like fantasy genre, especially when it comes to vampires or fairies or whatever sort of mythical creature, and they're always immortalized looking young, like right in their prime. And I think that exposes this, what I think is the true fear, right? I don't think speaking for myself, in engaging with death meditations and reflecting on this, I'm not afraid of death itself. I talk to my beloved dead, to the people that I cared about and care about who have passed on, and other spirits who I engage with and encounter, not as a medium. I'm not trying to, please don't, that's not what I do, but more just like as in my own practice, right? And building my own relationship with existence and what comes after human incarnation, right? Like what comes after this. And I don't have lots of answers. I have found my own peace with it. And I think part of why I'm not really afraid of death is because there's not a whole lot I can do about it once I'm dead, right? So once it happens, that's it. That's all she wrote. And, until the next life, or dimension, or whatever it is that you think happens or we think happens after death, I'm not here to make any definitive claims for things that are either speculation or based on deeply personal experiences and encounters, right? So it's for you to decide. I think what I fear, or what I observe in fear in people or around this conversation, is it's a fear of impermanence and the uncertainty that impermanence brings, right? If we don't know when, if we don't know how, on some level it gives us the luxury of denial, and it also increases the anxiety around the experience itself, right? And so the idea of aging, right? The idea of growing old or reaching a point where the likelihood, the probability is so much closer, can be scary for people, and for many reasons. And then I think the other thing that we fear is suffering, right? And like, am I going to suffer in death? Right? And the irony of how much we suffer in life uh, as a result of our fears and anxieties and our experiences. And I think this is the other thing. I've done a lot of work in suicide prevention and assessment. I am no stranger to ideation myself, and so much of that aspect of choosing when and how is about relief from suffering, right? It's about alleviating the pain, the anguish, the overwhelming sense of feeling everything. You know what I mean? So part of the benefit that I have found in meditating on death and in not shying away from what it is, what's scary about it, and the pain of loss. Because I think like there's a couple of things, right? There's the truth and the reality that not everybody gets the luxury of growing old. And so to age is a gift and a curse, right? It is a gift to be able to live out your entire life and until your physical being can no longer withstand, gravity, more or less. You know what I mean? Like can no longer withstand, life on Earth. And at the same time, it comes with the cost of witnessing and experiencing and feeling everything that comes with being alive and everything that comes with living in a mortal body that ages and decomposes and uh has limitations, and so the more I engaged with death, the more that I like became curious about it. It opened a pathway to find the beauty not just in death but in life, right? And that's part of why these an ancient wisdom tradition like Buddhism, right? Like an ancient spiritual practice like Buddhism incorporated this, because everything, if you ascribe to the belief that part of our purpose or our mission on this earth in any given lifetime is to integrate polarities, that means we have to understand and engage with both polarities, right? So if I am going to appreciate and find the joy and bliss and pleasure of being a sensing, sensual human being alive now, then I also need to have an understanding and a respect and an engagement with that, the polarity of that, which is to be numb, to understand to recognize the impermanence, right? The impermanence of everything, to acknowledge that death is just as much a part of life. And frankly, death is a resource, right? When things die, they decompose, and that decomposition process fertilizes the soil, and from that we are able to grow new things. It is a cyclical, really beautiful and dynamic process. And so in that vein, it's not something to be afraid of. It just is. It's not, it doesn't mean go out and experiment with it. It just means it is. And if we pretend like it doesn't exist, if we try to pretend or ignore that it's part of the human condition and the human experience, then it's like, losing a limb in a way. It's like it's cutting ourselves off from a part of ourselves that is important, And so I find that it's really interesting in building my own relationship, right, with death and death cycles, and it's something that does not intimidate me or scare me, and I find a lot of beauty in it. Um, and then I observe and I think of these sort of more existential or philosophical questions and the ways that humans, broadly speaking, to be overgeneral for a minute, have a habit of perpetuating pain and suffering, right? We linger in it, and we linger in it, I think, because we're afraid. We're afraid of the impermanence, right? If suffering is all we get, and if I'm suffering, at least I know I'm alive. And if everything else around me is changing or leaving or, you know, impermanent, is temporary, then maybe if I cling to my suffering, the sign that I'm alive, I will find that will, like, somehow in my suffering I will find peace, right? And which is it's paradoxical, and it's counterintuitive. And so and to me it's very understandable, because it is hard to exist on this planet as a human in many different contexts and be open to the full sensory experience. Not like all senses all the time, but just like I think of emotions as a sense, right? I think, there's our five physical senses, but I think, the emotions that we experience, the thoughts, the intuitive, guided, like all of that, those are senses. They're not, they're points of information. They're ways that we, are able to engage with the environment around us, with the people around us. And we are often conditioned to numb these senses, in part because when we don't know how to engage with them or navigate them supportively or constructively, they can become overwhelming, right? Either we feel out of control, or it's like a sensory overload situation, and the environments that we are in are not kind to that, right? They're not kind to people who feel. They're not kind to vulnerability. They're not kind to more subtle engagement with the ways that we experience the world and each other. And again, because if we're so cued in on suffering, that becomes the sort of primary objective, or like the modus operandi, that kind of, I was like, if you're not suffering, you're not living. It's this like weird story. And then we create these stories around only those who, meet whatever criteria, whether it's status, whether it's money, whether it's whatever, like only they are exempt from certain types of suffering, right? But everybody suffers. And so I think it's something that we as individuals and as communities can look to. And it's because it's not, there are spaces and communities and environments where there are rituals around death. I think there was a show on Netflix called Dark Tourist, and I think he had an episode on sort of death rituals around the world, which of course I loved that. I loved it. But like there are cultures and communities or subcultures within different spaces who have rituals and practices around death and dying, of honoring that. And frankly, death rituals are for the living more than the dead, and which is again why I think we don't actually fear death, because once death comes for us, it's come for us, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And and we're on the other side of it. And for some people that brings a sense of peace, right? For some people that creates anxiety and or fear, and then there's everything in between, right? There's all sorts of responses that people have to that idea. And all of the stories that we have about what comes after is about learning how to cope with being alive. You know what I mean? And I'm just, it doesn't matter what comes after. It doesn't matter what comes after unless unless you need to tell yourself something to come alive, to actually enjoy and engage with all of the wonder that comes with being present in this moment, in this time, in this space, in the location that you are in, with the people that you're around, in the spaces that you exist within. You know what I mean? There is so much adventure and wonder and beauty to be found in that. And there's also a lot of pain and suffering and anguish that comes with being human and having to exist, especially in spaces that are not kind or friendly to the ways that you experience the world, right? Or the ways that you want to experience the world. And so when it comes to meditating on death and engaging with it and building a relationship with it, it's a way of exploring and building a relationship with how you want to live. And sometimes confronting the dark or uncomfortable realities of, suffering or pain or abandonment, or the things that you are afraid of that are stories that are not current, like not stories that are actually like true or alive in this moment for you, or those things that maybe are real and difficult and that create a desperation for relief and for release and for some sort of for the pressure or the tension to ease that you experience, right? For the overwhelm to stop feeling like you're drowning. And so there's caution there, right? There's caution in that, because I want to acknowledge that this is not something that is always easy or recommended if you are in a space where your current reality is not safe, or is unstable in ways that are beyond your control. Because I think a lot of times we are seeking a sense of control, right? We're seeking a sense of control and autonomy and choice when we feel like we have none. And so being mindful of that as you engage with this, and also, I want to call attention to this too, because there are spaces, there are spaces, there are places where you can engage with these conversations without it having to be a scary thing. Morbid, sure, but it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be a place of judgment or shame. it can be safe. That's, I guess I'm talking about safety, really, because I think that has been my experience, at least, is, you know, interestingly, when I've lived in other countries where, you know, attending funerals as a social event, you know, like where it's normal, it's more normalized to accept that people die, and then you go to the family's home and you know, you pay your respects and you go through the whatever the ritual is, and it's just a thing, and people talk about life and death, and you know, you're in an environment that is high risk, and so there's a lot of death around. um Talking about death and what it means, and that it exists, and that it happens, and what that means to for life, for how to live, is normal in other places. But in the US, at least, um, my experiences when this topic comes up, it is not very common for people to respond with curiosity or a desire to, like, an openness to it, right? People tend to get really cagey, people tend to get really um, uncomfortable, and you know, for many different reasons, or worried, you know, and so it's one of those things where I want to help normalize that talking about the full cycle of life uh, is is okay. It's natural, and building a relationship with death and understanding what that means to you about how you want to live and how you want to exist in the world, and how you want to negotiate and navigate the polarities that come from feeling, you know, from being a feeling person. And maybe this is a different video, but there's I notice a lot of I noticed a lot of numbing and dissociation, but frankly, like that was my experience, right? You know, for a long time, and for many different reasons, you know, in experiences through my life, dissociating from the present moment, or finding ways to sort of numb and just not experience feeling everything that I was capable of feeling, was a habit. And there were times and periods of my life where that was a necessary and helpful and constructive coping strategy. And there have been many other times, where that actually compounded the suffering or the sort of anguish that I experienced. Um, so, you know, I don't want to speak for everybody, or sort of, and again, this isn't this channel, and my approach to things is not to claim authority over anything, right? It's to offer a perspective, to offer a lens through which to explore some of these things, and a voice on it in case you don't have those around you, right? Or it's new to you, or it's different than what you're exposed to. That's all this is just perspective, you know, to be shared and either accepted or rejected. You know, you get to decide. You're the viewer. You have the controls on your screen. So all of that to say, you know, I think that is another, so much of what I do and what I address when I focus on burnout and burnout recovery is this idea of coming alive. And part of that is stopping the things that you've been doing to numb. And there's a lot that can be intimidating, I think is the right word for it. That can be intimidating, and it can also be challenging, because it's a practice of remembering. And when we, remembering what it was like to feel. And depending on how long we've been numbing, depending on, um, depending on so many things, when we engage in the act of remembering, there's lots of things that can get kicked up, or that where, there's some tangled knots of memories that exist sometimes, and so that can also be challenging to navigate, or again intimidating. And so maybe this will be a separate, maybe that'll be something else I talk about another time, is this whole process of, you know um, resensitizing yourself, I guess is what it would be called. So yeah. Anyway, um, but yeah, I would say there's some. I don't have any particular meditation to endorse, but I would say explore those meditations, if that's something that calls to you. They have guided meditations, which I would recommend to start with, especially, just so that you have, some sort of structure, like you have some bumpers on your lane. You know what I mean? All of that to say, be well, be safe, and I will see you when I see you.